Hi folks, let's hop into story here. Of the three areas that we tend to work in, camera, editing, and story or pre-pro here, this seems to be the most mysterious. Seems that people can get their hands on a camera, figure out how to point it in the right direction and control it. Editing, we kind of understand that innately and we start editing well. When we get to story, people tend to struggle a little bit, and this is one of the reasons why I hold it till later in the semester. But I want to show you that you need not be concerned about it. You shouldn't think it too mysterious. And I'm going to share with you a process that I think you can use that's been very successful for me and then other people that I've taught it to. So traditionally, when somebody asks you to write a film, make a film, what do you turn to? Most people go right to script, and they start typing words and dialogue. I think this is dangerous because you don't know where it's going. You're writing in a different medium, that being prose. You're challenged by all those language and grammar rules that were beaten into us. And now you're left using that kind of prose written word to describe visuals. And ours is a visual medium, right? So to hop right in and start working in a script, I think is counterproductive. And I think most people struggle because they go right there. My argument is that you're not quite ready for that unless you take this step, and this is a process that I still use today. So it's a little bit of an alternative to the conventional approach. What I want you to think about is how you tell a story to your friend. So when we can all get back out, you can go out for an evening, a weekend. When you're relaying those events to your friend the next week over coffee, what words are you using? How are you creating excitement? What event happens that you're taking your friend up to? This is how we tell story. I think this is a more natural way for us to write story, and especially film. All right, and then we take that story that we've just shared with somebody and we break it into bullets, the key events that take place. And this is called an action outline. And this is the best way that I've found to write films. So what key points do you need to make sure are included? You've got to have a setup. So this is excuse me, traditional storytelling. And for everything that you'll do for me, and then until it becomes second nature for you, you have to make sure that these 5 things are there. So your setup is, where does your story begin? With whom? And if you can set up the goal for your characters, this is the time to do it. The second thing that we use is called a turning point. Now what happens here is once you've established who your characters are, what they're about to do, then there's an event, that sparks the story in it, and it changes the direction of the story. Okay? This is called a turning point, and we build those into our stories. After that, everything that takes place primarily is about your protagonist overcoming obstacles to get to their goal or to get to that climactic event. And for our purposes, and in most short films, it's usually 3 things that the protagonist has to overcome to either get to the climactic event or not. So that takes us to number 4. And the goal or the climactic event, it doesn't matter whether your protagonist gets there or not in terms of structure. They just have to arrive there. And then the last piece is resolution. And this tends to be the moral of the story. And by that, I mean if your protagonist has to escape from a planet, and that's what our whole film is about, the minute they do escape or don't, the film doesn't end. There's always this little resolution part that makes us understand a little better about what happened there in the film. Okay? So these 5 things, print them out. Really important. This is the key to basic structure. Excuse me. And if you don't like to see it in prose, here it is in a chart or a graph. Okay? Now, you can see that intensity is on the left-hand side, and it's being driven by time. Your story, our stories, and I highly recommend that you hold to this. As you first start out here, do not use flashbacks. You don't care about telling your story from the back forward. When you first start, you have to master this before you start messing with time. Okay? So your intensity should climb over time the closer we get to this climactic event. The first part of the story is your setup. Here's the turning point, which then accelerates your protagonist through a series of obstacles, and each one is going to be more intense than the last as the character gets to this goal that's been set for them or climax. And then there's a resolution and an end. Right? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but here's the deal. Excuse me. It works. And it works in feature films. It works in large epic films. Think of any significant Hollywood film, and it's probably going to fit into this pattern. Now, just because we have a pattern, just because we have a system, doesn't mean you can't be creative, because what happens to our characters, what kind of obstacles we choose to place there, what the goal is, that's where the creativity comes in, and that's where we get to mix and match things. But all key story has this kind of format. What else does it have? For us, in a short story, you get one protagonist. So you have to be very clear on who your story's about, and it's just about this one person. The antagonist can be different things or an individual. So the antagonist's role is to create obstacles that your protagonist has to overcome. And herein lies the key to developing good story and good characters. It's not what your character says, it's what your character does to overcome these obstacles or not overcome them. They can fail, that's great. How do they move forward? How do they pick themselves up and decide to go forward? This is traditional storytelling, and it works for us. Then we like to always include a sense of urgency, and we do that with time. All right, so the story that you're going to tell has to be driven by some sort of a time element. So it's doing a homework assignment for tomorrow at second period, and everything that your character is doing in the film is driven by either failing or succeeding at tomorrow morning's second period class. And again, if you look at most Hollywood stories, most films, they are going to follow this suit very directly. And it can be larger in scope, so it can be what's happening in World War II. But in that event that takes place in World War II, it's going to have this beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's going to be driven by some sense of time. And the time element, let me go back here, the time element helps us increase the intensity. If we don't have this, if we're not taking and working this arc and moving it up and increasing intensity over time, you have a flatline approach. And they do make films like this. There are films that are just character driven. We're going to spend an hour and a half with these two characters, and nothing truly significant happens. We're just going to go in and visit them and live with them for an hour and a half as characters. that exists. It's a valid story, but it's not the traditional story arc that we're going to use in here. Okay? So some of the terms that you've probably heard before is beginning, middle, and end. That comes out of basic grammar classes, and that's perfectly fine. But here's how I want you to start thinking about it. In your beginning, you have your setup. Then there's this turning point for the middle, which includes the obstacles that your protagonist has to overcome. And then you're going to get to your goal, your climactic event, and then give us a resolution. Okay? Now, there's a whole bunch of ways to share this with you, and one of them that I'd like to use for this module is actually to play, I'm going to set this up on the next page and embed this video. And the video is a great example of how this works in film. And it's a short film, and it's actually done by one of my previous students at university for their senior project. Now, we had a whole semester to work on this, and we started with the action outline like I'm going to ask you to do. And the action outline creates this kind of bones. It's a skeleton approach. And it allows us to go in and make sure that all the elements are here, that they're all driving the story properly and the characters properly. And if not, I can make changes here in the action outline that doesn't upset me for writing all this great dialogue that I'm then resistant to change. So this next film is a 5 to 7 minute film. This is what's traditionally a short film and something that you'll start working on as you go forward. And I want to just stop now, and I want you to go advance to the next page, watch the film, and then we'll come back and take a look at this story in an action outline. All right, thanks, hang tight, and enjoy the film.